The name's Mabus, and welcome to the month of Zelda moments. And in week 2, we'll be discussing the top 5 most emotional moments in the Legend of Zelda series. Now, when most people talk about emotional moments, they either mean sad or bittersweet, which is mostly what this list comprises of. So if you're sensitive to that sort of thing, you may want your tissues on standby. You've been warned. The first time you come across the music box house, it is creepy like fuck. A random house on a canyon with horns sticking out of its roof. A bunch of Gibdos walking around. And that is a small child playing in the riverbed. Perhaps it's best not to ask questions. After sneaking into the house without the little girl noticing you, you observe how pleasant the interior of the music box house is. Very quaint. However, once you get down to the basement, you see pictures of Gibdos and Garros hanging on the wall. Okay. Upon further investigation, you approach a closed cabinet. Get too close to said cabinet, and you'll see a half-man, half-Gibdo jump out at you in very clear distress. Like he's being consumed slowly. If you go to attack him, Pamela, the little girl from outside, will come running in and try to stop you, then proceed to try to soothe her father, who she is trying to save from becoming a Gibdo. Alternatively, if you play the Song of Healing instead, you relieve him of his ailment, and Pamela comes running in again to tell him that he was just having a really bad dream. That's one of the things that Majora's Mask does exceptionally well. A cutscene and an outcome based on your actions and decisions. This leads to a much more effective storyline and emotional attachment to its characters. And the emotional moment you get with very little yet effective backstory is enough to make sure it's not easily forgotten. Wind Waker is a cheerful game, right? I mean, other than the Earth Temple and cuddly Ganon's perverted ways, there isn't too much that goes against the general happy overtone of the Great Sea. But to me, there's a few moments that tugged at the heartstrings just enough to make this list. The couple of interactions with Grandma could definitely qualify, and I already mentioned in a previous video about Medley's awakening. But to me, saying goodbye to the King of Hyrule takes the cake. It wouldn't have been nearly as bad if he didn't choose to stay behind, considering there was really no reason he had to. Or, when you were returning to the surface and saying goodbye, he didn't reach out his hand just inches away from Link's grasp as the ocean assimilated him and the bubbles stopped. And to top it all off, a very gloomy version of the Hyrule Castle theme played in the background. But during one of the saddest moments of Wind Waker, words of inspiration came from King Daphnis' mouth and gave you hope for your future, just in time to hear the uplifting credit music and make your emotional roller coaster end on a high note. That is until the cutscene afterwards, where you notice the King of Red Lion's eyes are vacant. I guess the roller coaster wasn't over after all. Okay, let's be
110%
honest here. For gameplay, Fi is one of the most obnoxious sidekicks in the Zelda series, and that's saying something. She tells you more information than you want or need to know, and she does it without prompting her. You'll be enjoying your adventure when all of a sudden she shows up out of the blue and tells you everything about everything in great detail, twice. Even with things that are so blindingly obvious. But in Fi's defense, she does have some redeeming qualities that someone like Navi doesn't have. Like, at least she tells you useful information. And a lot of times, her appearances actually help tell the story most of the time. For example, I never realized how annoying she actually was during my first playthrough of Skyward Sword. So when it was time to say goodbye to the Master Sword, it meant that Fi would be left there to sleep as well. And with how emotionlessly she served me throughout the entire game, it was quite moving when she thanked me for being a part of my journey, all while Fi's farewell theme lingered in the background. There's something to be said about robots learning the feelings of happiness and joy. It means that something significantly special has happened to them. And you realize that being human is more than just flesh and blood. As opposed to Fi, Midna is regarded to be one of the best sidekicks in the Zelda series. Midna may have started out annoying and rude, but her character development during the game earns your appreciation. And because of this, you become quite attached to your new best bud. And if it was difficult to say goodbye to somebody like Fee, you could only imagine Midna's parting to be much more difficult. And while it's nice to see Fee go peacefully and happy, Midna's fate appears to be much darker. After defeating Zant and failing to transform back into her regular self, things look hopeless for Midna. During the final battle with Ganon, she warps Zelda and Link away to sea. Realizing what she's doing is suicide, Link rushes to try to stop her, but is just short and gets teleported to Hyrule Field just in time to see the castle implode, and Ganon still standing. That's not the way you wanted to say goodbye, but it was heroic nonetheless. Following the disposal of that Gerudo punk, you are amazed to see that Midna not only survived, but is transformed back into her regular form. All is happiness and joy during the credits, where everyone returns back to their home, and Midna gets the nice ending she so desperately deserved. However, that roller coaster ride comes back around for a second trip. As Midna returns to the Twilight, she begins to utterly destroy the mirror that will take her there, and you realize that this is a one-way trip, and goodbye, forever. Are you starting to notice a theme here? The last few entries have been goodbye related to a person or entity. Well, this one isn't any different, just on a bigger scale. This time it's not just one person that you're saying goodbye to, but the whole world. And the appropriately named final hours of Majora's Mask is just that. The last few hours before the land of Termina falls victim to the crashing down of the moon. But it's not just the terrorizing of the player's feelings as what puts it at number 1 on this list, but instead the feelings of the characters in the game. Being a 3-day time frame, you get to notice how most of the citizens of Termina and Clocktown react to such a catastrophic event. You see the skeptical deniers, the cocky, and even the ones who just couldn't be bothered or were too busy for the end of the world. But fast forward to the final hours, and we see their true colors come out. The deniers are taking out their anger and sadness on the very event itself, the cocky are cowering away in a dark hidden corner where no one will find them, and the oblivious are parked at a bar stool, drinking away their reality. But the few instances that I found to be the most disturbing are the ones where Crimea drugs her little sister so she doesn't know what was coming, the swordsman cowering in his dojo, and the mailman who wants to flee but doesn't want to leave his duties left behind, where he is on his hands and knees, visibly distraught whether to stay or to flee. The final hour shows multiple reactions of how people would react in a real-life end-of-days-like scenario. And if you can't find any of these to connect with, then at the very least the anxiety alone will cripple you. The name's Mabus. And the most noteworthy emotional events tend to be the sad or bittersweet. But that's not always necessarily the case. And just like in the final hours, you just don't know how you're going to feel until it actually happens. So in the meantime and in between time, stay tuned for more.